everyone. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick, Research Director with the Futurum Group, and I'd like to welcome you to Enterprising Insights. It's our weekly podcast that explores the latest developments in the enterprise software market and the technologies that underpin these platforms, applications, and tools. This week, I'd like to talk about Salesforce's recent announcement of what it claims is the world's first LLM benchmark for CRM. So we're going to get into what that benchmark is, why it's important, and assess whether or not we're going to start seeing others like that benchmark start to crop up in the market, particularly as we are kind of entering this new phase of generative AI, where we're moving away from just sort of utilizing a large language model, sort of a generic large language model, and starting to see more purpose-built ones and ones that are being tuned for specific applications, specific tasks, and so on and so forth. Then, as always, I'm going to move to my Rant or Rave segment, where I pick one item in the market and I either champion it or I criticize it. So without further delay, let's get into this week's topic, which is Salesforce's announcement of a new benchmark for LLMs, tailored toward the CRM application. So Salesforce did announce this. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago now. I'm a little late to get to this in terms of my schedule, but I do think it's an important topic. So this new benchmark, it's essentially, according to Salesforce, it's a comprehensive evaluation framework that measures the performance of LLMs against four specific measures: LLM accuracy, cost, speed, and then trust and safety. So what this benchmark is really trying to do is evaluate common sales and service use cases, including things like prospecting, lead nurturing, and sales opportunity and service case summaries. So it is not sort of a generic benchmark trying to assess the LLM performance against sort of, generic factors or just overall speed or overall accuracy. That's not what it's trying to do. What it's trying to do is look at an LLM in context being used for these very specific use cases within a CRM application. Now, this is really designed to help people who are using Salesforce really evaluate other LLMs and choose which ones are going to work best for their specific use cases. Now, why is there even a need for this? Well, there are existing LLM benchmarks, but they're really sort of academic in nature, or they're focused on consumer use cases. It's not really relevant for business users. I think one of the other things that they mention is that it really, existing ones are very, very much focused on sort of pure benchmarks with respect to compute and how quickly it returns a result. They don't really have sort of these expert human evaluations going in to really address some of these other issues and making sure that there really is accuracy in context. And the other thing, of course, is trust, making sure that the LLM doesn't go off the rails and hallucinate. This is really about looking at something in practice. To give you a sort of an analogy, if we look at how automobiles, if you read any kind of car enthusiast magazine, whether we're talking Car and Driver, Motor Trend, whatever, they'll give you sort of the specs that the manufacturer provides. Then they'll run their sort of road tests and give, let's say, a 0 to 60 assessment on how quickly a car can accelerate. That's great, but that doesn't necessarily translate to sort of the real world of driving a car. That's where you need to actually conduct other tests, things like what is the speed to accelerate from 55 to 75 to pass. How long does it take to do that? Because that's really looking at the vehicle in context. And then, of course, you would need to do that, to really get an accurate benchmark. You really have to incorporate other factors such as, the driver's confidence and skill level, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what this LLM benchmark is trying to do. It's trying to look at LLM performance within the context of very specific sales and service-based use cases as it pertains to being used with Salesforce CRM. Now, I think what's really interesting, and I'm going to try to include a screenshot of the interface, which actually has this benchmark, and basically it will line up a number of different LLMs, and it will go through each sort of attribute across the four different categories of accuracy, cost, speed, and trust, and assess each LLM based on that for specific use cases. And I think what is basically, let's just take a look at some of the attributes here. So accuracy. This is probably they're all important, but accuracy is a big one. So this metric actually contains four different subcategories: factuality, completeness, conciseness, and the ability to follow instructions. So if you think about accuracy as it pertains to a model, it really is about combining all four of those subcategories together, because even if, you know, an LLM were to provide a factual answer, it may be not necessarily following the instructions of the prompt as accurately as we might want it to be. Same thing with completeness. If you think of, if you were to ask the LLM to return something and it returns a result that is partially correct, but it's not fully complete, that may not be yet useful in the scope of an actual business use case. So this is interesting that accuracy measure contains a number of different subcategories, and that's why it's important to consider all of them together to, to really assess the performance of a particular LLM and its value as a business tool. Cost. This is another one. Now, cost is this is interesting because it's categorized as high, medium, and low based on a percentile basis. This is an estimated operational cost that will vary by each use case, and really it's more of a comparative scale where you're comparing different LLMs against each other based on a specific use case. And it's really a relative measure as opposed to a hard and fast, cost of X amount to operate, because that's very, very difficult to ascertain, because it will vary based on exactly what goes into each prompt and what type of data is being queried, all of that kind of stuff. But you can get a relative idea on the cost of a model versus another. So I think that's interesting. Now, the third one is speed. This is a metric that assesses the LLM's responsiveness and efficiency in processing and delivering information. Obviously, faster response times will improve the user experience and reduce the wait time for customers when deployed in certain customer-facing applications. And of course, it enables any kind of service or support teams to address inquiries more quickly if the LLM is responsive. And again, this is interesting because certain things are going to take the LLM longer to respond to, and that's where it's important to look at which LLM works best for a specific use case, so you can determine which one might be most suitable. And then, of course, you're going to also have to balance that against some of the other factors in there as well, because again, all of this is about, it's not necessarily going to be about, hey, let's just pick the one that is, has the top numbers in a specific category. It's really about evaluating it in context. And then, of course, the fourth category here, and this is something that Salesforce has been sort of pounding the table on really since generative AI became a thing about a year and a half ago. That is trust and safety. And this metric is designed to measure the LLM's capability to shield sensitive customer data, adhere to privacy regulations, secure that information, and refrain from incorporating bias and toxicity for various CRM use cases. Now, this one is interesting because it's really looking at the model and framing it in the context of adhering to those specific criteria. That's going to be really important for organizations as they start to evaluate other LLMs, and obviously even as we move to more of an open model for generative AI. I expect that that's going to be increasingly important. We're going to get into a little later on in terms of looking at these issues, particularly around the use of data and how that really will impact an organization, and its relationship with its customers. Now, I think there's a couple other things here that I think are worth mentioning. I do think that Salesforce, this is a good move for them in terms of kind of being out in front of the issue of trying to assess the performance of LLMs in context. Because really, if you don't assess an LLM using very, very specific or standardized metrics, it's very hard to compare what is the best one for a specific use case. I do think that we're going to start to see other platforms also develop these types of benchmarks, and perhaps we're going to see some third-party companies provide the solution as well. I still think, though, it's going to have to be an evaluation that's done in a very specific manner. And what I mean by that is you can't just have this one sort of, okay, let's compare these models, because you're going to have to look at what platform you're using, what data are you using, or type of data are you using, what use case. And that's going to be very, very specific to the organization and the tools that they have in place. I do think that looking at this within the context of data available is going to be, it is not an easy process, but having a tool to kind of start that process really kind of gets you that much further down the road, particularly as organizations, end user organizations, start to incorporate things like small language models, that type of those types of very, very specific models. That's going to be important to them. To really ascertain what is the best approach with generative AI. Is it taking a large, open model with, however many billion parameters, like, OpenAI, or is it going to be looking at a model that might be a little more expensive to use because it has been purpose-built? And if so, if it performs better on some other metrics, perhaps that's the best use case. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that kind of pans out over time as organizations get more familiar with generative AI and really start to crystallize their vision for what they want to do and what business outcomes they're looking to actually enable using generative AI, obviously in conjunction with other technology. So I think to kind of wrap up on this, it'd be interesting to see where we're headed, but I think this is the start of a trend. I do think we're going to see some more of these tools come into the marketplace over the next several months and years. Okay, so with that, I want to move to my Rant or Rave segment. That's where I pick one item in the market and I will either champion it or criticize it. And this week I have a rant. So this is interesting, kind of piggybacking on the data security, data privacy issues that I was just speaking of. So apparently the New York Times just reported that Senators Ron Wyden of Oregon and Edward J. Markey of Massachusetts recently sent a letter to the FTC on July 26th. And in this letter, the two senators called out General Motors, Hyundai, and Honda for collecting driving data from customer vehicles. So when we're talking about driving data, that's things like how fast a driver accelerated, how hard they braked, how often they went over the speed limit, are they braking hard a lot, all of that kind of stuff. Now, and they're saying that this data was sold to insurance companies so they could better gauge driver risk. Now, basically, this is really interesting because at the heart of this, it's Senator Wyden said that it was deceptive on how it got people to opt into this. And just as a little bit of background, obviously we all have insurance, auto insurance companies, and many of them have similar programs where one of them, Allstate, I think it's DriveWise, where the idea or the way its market is, it says that they will collect data from you, the driver, and then it gives them a better picture of your risk. What they don't always say is that obviously if you engage in risky behavior, your rates are probably going to go up because you're a higher risk. So what this lawsuit does, though, is it is saying that it collected data from vehicles with an internet connection, and it sounds like they weren't very, at least the letter says that GM and Honda actually gave the drivers a choice to opt in, but it was deceptive. Now, I think that really when we're talking about this, there's two issues here. One is, were these auto companies clear about the fact that the data would be collected? Number two, were they clear about, what this really meant in terms of the potential for that data to be sold to another party, essentially insurance companies, and what would the impact be or potential impact be from those insurance companies then using that data? I think, regardless of whether or not you agree with, that type of data being used to assess risk or not, I tend to think, hey, it's kind of fair game in the sense of what are insurance companies really, they are basically risk managers. That's all they are. And obviously their job or the only way they really are successful in the market is if they can accurately assess risk and then price their services based on that. I think the bigger issue here is really looking at, again, disclosure issues and deceptive language when it comes to the collection and use and potential sale of the data. As as we become a data-driven world, it is really important that organizations, are transparent about this process. You're going to get some people who are perfectly fine with this. I mean, I actually just spoke with my mother about this, my nearly 80-year-old mother, who is, participates in one of these programs, and she says, I'm fine with it because I don't drive very much and I don't want to pay more. And I know that I'm, going to not be driving aggressively or crazy or anything like that. So I'm happy with that. So she's okay with that. But I think the issue is again, letting people know, being transparent about it, because obviously the more data that's being collected, it's also going into these algorithms, and it can have an adverse effect on people without them knowing. And the fact that the organizations are not being clear about it or transparent is kind of a major impact, or can have a major impact on consumer trust. And that's why you get people who are running around, you know, obviously worried about their data, how it's being used, is it being resold, and so forth. So I do think that that is a negative, mark on uh, or signal to the market in terms of data. Because obviously, if their intentions were completely altruistic, I don't think they would have that sort of what the senators say is deceptive language. Now, the other thing that was very interesting in this piece that I read about this case, um, these automakers actually didn't make very much money from selling this data. Now, according to this letter, uh, uh, Verisk paid Honda $25,920 over 4 years for information on about 97,000 cars. And if you look at the math, that's about 26 cents per car. Now, Hyundai was paid just about $1 million, or 61 cents per car over 6 years. And, to me, it seems like a heck of a lot of negative potential publicity for not a heck of a lot of money. Um, but, again, it's possible that they were looking at this in terms of something that, as an incremental revenue stream, or they were looking to maybe at some point expand it. But it just seems to me that it's strange that they would engage in this and potentially use deceptive tactics for really what is just honestly, pocket change. So very interesting. Again, I think the big takeaway for me with all this and why I'm ranting about this is, again, we live in a data-driven world. Everyone knows that companies are looking to collect data. At this point, it just doesn't, to me, make any sense to violate any kind of trust you have with consumers by being deceptive or less than transparent about the data that is being collected and what it could be used for, or that it could be sold. Because in the end, when we think about consumer choice, that could have a very negative effect if people feel that they were duped. So that is my rant for the week. So I want to thank everyone here for joining me at on Enterprising Insights. I will be back again next week with another episode focused in on the happenings within the enterprise application market. So be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on your preferred platform, and I will see you next time.